The first thing Elliot noticed was that his boss had stopped pretending. For 2 years, Marianne Holloway had walked through the glass doors of Holloway and Finch Consulting like a woman who had built herself out of steel. Her voice was calm. Her posture perfect. Her schedules impossible. Employees straightened their backs when she entered a room. Clients trusted her before she even shook their hands. Even the elevators seemed to pause for her. But at nearly midnight on a quiet Thursday, Elliot found her sitting alone on the floor beside the underground parking garage lift, barefoot, holding one heel in her hand and staring at nothing. She looked tired in a way he had never seen before. Not dramatic. Not broken. Just tired. Elliot froze a few feet away, his laptop bag hanging from his shoulder. He had stayed late to finish a presentation after everyone else left. Usually Marianne was long gone by then, but tonight the building felt strangely silent, and now he understood why. She slowly lifted her eyes toward him. "Oh," she murmured, almost embarrassed. "You're still here." Elliot nodded carefully. "So are you." A weak laugh escaped her, though it sounded more like surrender than humor. Beside her sat an expensive handbag, slightly tipped over. A small silver flask rested near her knee. That explained the faint smell on her breath. Marianne Holloway was drunk. Not reckless. Not loud. Not angry. Just quietly, painfully drunk. Elliot looked around the empty parking garage instinctively, as though someone else might appear and rescue the situation for him. Nobody did. "I think," Marianne said slowly, "I may have underestimated how much whiskey was left in that thing." He hesitated before stepping closer. "Can you stand?" Probably not elegantly. Despite himself, Elliot smiled faintly. Elegance might not be necessary right now. She attempted to push herself up, but her balance failed almost immediately. Elliot caught her arm before she slipped again. For a moment, she stiffened. Not because she feared him. Because she wasn't used to needing anyone. "I'm all right," she whispered automatically. Elliot had heard those exact words from exhausted coworkers, grieving relatives, strangers at train stations, and once from his own mother while she sat in a hospital waiting room trying not to cry. People usually said "I'm all right" when they desperately wished it were true. "You don't have to be," he replied gently. Something flickered in her expression then. A crack. Small, but real. She looked away quickly. "My driver left an hour ago," she admitted. "I told him I'd manage." "Do you have someone I can call?" Marianne shook her head immediately. Too quickly. Elliot noticed that. He also noticed the loneliness in it. He glanced toward the parking exits. "Where do you live?" "Westbridge." "That's 40 minutes away." "I'm aware," she said dryly. He exhaled quietly, thinking. Then he bent down, picked up her handbag and shoes, and offered his arm. "Come on," he said. "I'll take you home." Marianne stared at him as though the idea confused her. "You'll drive me?" "You can barely walk." "You work for me." "That's true." "That's inappropriate." "You sitting on a parking garage floor at midnight is also slightly inappropriate." To his surprise, she laughed properly that time. It was small, tired, but genuine. And for the first time since Elliot had joined the company, Marianne Holloway looked human. The drive was mostly silent. Elliot kept the radio low while Marianne leaned against the passenger window with her eyes half closed. The city lights rolled across her face in soft gold and white reflections. At one red light, she suddenly spoke. "My father built this company." Elliot glanced at her briefly. "I know." He believed exhaustion was proof of loyalty. Her voice remained distant, almost dreamy. "If you weren't sacrificing something, you weren't working hard enough." Elliot said nothing. He used to sleep in the office before major contracts. She smiled faintly. "When I was 12, I thought it was heroic." The light turned green. "And now?" Marianne stared ahead. Now I think he forgot how to go home. Something about the way she said it made Elliot wonder whether she was talking about work at all. When they finally reached her house, he understood another thing immediately. It was enormous. Beautiful stone walls. Tall windows. Perfect landscaping. And completely dark. No porch light waited for her. No television glow. No family member opening the door. Just silence. Marianne fumbled with her keys twice before Elliot gently took them and unlocked the door for her. The inside of the house looked like a magazine spread, immaculate furniture, polished wood floors, carefully chosen artwork. But homes usually carried evidence of living. This place carried evidence of maintenance. Elliot helped her inside carefully. "You should drink water," he said. "I should probably drink an entire lake." He guided her toward the kitchen, found a glass, and filled it. She obeyed quietly, sitting at the counter while he searched for painkillers she insisted were somewhere near the tea. "You've done this before," she observed softly. "My older brother used to make terrible decisions at university." "Did he survive?" "Barely." Again, that tiny smile appeared. Elliot finally found the medicine and handed it over. Marianne took it obediently, then sat there holding the empty glass with both hands. The silence changed. It no longer felt awkward. Just honest. Then, unexpectedly, she spoke again. "My husband left 3 years ago." Elliot blinked softly. "I'm sorry." He said living with me felt like sharing a house with a meeting schedule. Her voice carried no bitterness. Only exhaustion. He wasn't entirely wrong. Elliot leaned lightly against the counter. People can work too much without becoming unlovable. Marianne looked at him then. Really looked at him. Most employees avoided direct eye contact with her. Some feared her approval too much. Others only saw the title attached to her office door. But Elliot's expression held no agenda. No intimidation. No pity. Just kindness. And somehow that seemed harder for her to face. "You should go home," she whispered. He nodded gently. "You'll be all right?" That familiar answer almost returned to her lips. He could see it. But this time, Marianne paused. Then she gave a small, honest shrug. "I don't know." Elliot picked up his coat slowly. Before leaving, he wrote something on a notepad near the kitchen counter. Marianne frowned. "What's that?" "My number." "You already work for me." "That's my personal number," he clarified. "If tomorrow feels worse than tonight, call someone." She looked down at the paper quietly. No one had said something like that to her in a very long time. Elliot left without expecting anything in return. Not praise. Not promotion. Not recognition. Because kindness, as his mother used to say, mattered most when nobody was watching. The next morning, Elliot nearly dropped his coffee when someone knocked on his apartment door. He checked the clock. 7:12 a.m. Too early for visitors. When he opened the door, Marianne Holloway stood outside holding a paper bag and looking unusually uncertain. Not polished. Not commanding. Just nervous. Her eyes were slightly red, though not from alcohol this time. Elliot stared. "You found my address? You updated emergency employee records last winter." "That's mildly terrifying." "I know." For a second, neither moved. Then Marianne lifted the paper bag awkwardly. "I brought breakfast." Elliot blinked. "You brought breakfast?" "I wasn't sure what people normally do after," she hesitated. "After someone carries them home with dignity intact." Despite himself, Elliot laughed softly. "You didn't have to do this." "I know." There was that word again. Not obligation. Choice. He stepped aside. "You'd better come in before the neighbors assume I'm secretly unemployed and entertaining executives for sport." To his surprise, Marianne smiled. His apartment was tiny compared to her house. Warm. Cluttered in places. Books stacked near the sofa. A half-watered plant near the window. A knitted blanket folded badly across a chair. Real. Marianne stood quietly taking it in. It smells like cinnamon. My downstairs neighbor bakes when she's stressed. You know your neighbors? Elliot glanced at her gently. Most of them. Something about that answer affected her more than he expected. He made tea while Marianne unpacked breakfast sandwiches from a local bakery. I don't usually drink that much, she admitted suddenly. You don't owe me explanations. I know. She exhaled slowly. But I think I owe you honesty. Elliot sat across from her at the small kitchen table. For a moment, she simply stared at her untouched tea. Then the truth finally arrived. My mother forgot my birthday yesterday. Elliot's expression softened. She has dementia, Marianne continued quietly. Most days she remembers who I am. Yesterday she thought I was one of the nurses. The words came carefully controlled, but Elliot could hear the ache underneath them. I left the care home pretending it didn't matter, Marianne said. Then I went back to the office because I didn't know where else to go. Elliot understood then. The whiskey. The parking garage. The silence. It had never been about weakness. It was grief. Slow grief. The kind that arrived in pieces. I'm sorry, he said sincerely. Marianne stared at the table. The strange thing is, I spent my entire career becoming successful enough to protect the people I love. Her voice tightened slightly. And there's absolutely nothing I can do about this. Elliot nodded slowly. My father used to say fixing problems was the only useful skill in life. And was he right? Sometimes. Elliot leaned back slightly. But some people don't need solutions. They just need someone willing to stay. That sentence settled heavily between them. Marianne looked at him again with that same searching expression from the night before. As though she could not quite understand how someone could speak gently without wanting something in return. After breakfast, she stood awkwardly near the door. I'll see you at work, Elliot said. She nodded. Then hesitated. Thank you, she whispered. Not corporate gratitude. Not polished professionalism. Real gratitude. And somehow that mattered more. The office changed after that. Not dramatically. Subtly. Marianne still ran meetings with precision. Deadlines still mattered. Standards remained high. But Elliot noticed small differences. She began asking employees whether they had eaten during long projects. She stopped scheduling meetings after 6 p.m. One Friday afternoon, the entire staff nearly fainted when she told everyone to go home early because the weather was beautiful. Rumors spread instantly. She's been replaced by a clone. She's secretly in love. She's dying. Elliot ignored all of it. But he did notice something else. Marianne started staying less isolated. Sometimes she joined staff lunches briefly. Sometimes she asked people about their families and actually listened to the answers. One evening, Elliot found her standing near the office windows overlooking the city. You're leaving before midnight, he observed. Miracles happen. He stepped beside her. The sunset painted the buildings golden amber. My mother had a good day today, Marianne said quietly. She remembered my name. Elliot smiled softly. That's good. She also remembered my favorite song when I was 10. What was it? Marianne looked embarrassed. An extremely terrible pop song from the 90s. Now I definitely need the title. You absolutely do not. He laughed. And then, unexpectedly, she laughed too. Not the restrained polite version. A real one. Warm. Bright. Alive. Elliot realized then that loneliness changes people quietly. It convinces them they are too complicated, too damaged, too late for connection. And sometimes all it takes to begin undoing that lie is one person willing to sit beside them without judgment. Weeks passed. Then months. Elliot and Marianne developed an unusual friendship neither of them fully understood at first. They shared coffee after difficult meetings. They exchanged sarcastic commentary during endless presentations. Sometimes Marianne asked his advice about employees instead of assuming authority alone had all the answers. And slowly, almost invisibly, she started becoming someone softer. Not weaker. Just more open. One Saturday afternoon, Elliot visited the care home with her. He hadn't planned to. Marianne had mentioned feeling anxious about going alone, and before thinking too much about it, he simply said, "I'll come." Her mother, Evelyn, sat near a garden window folding napkins carefully. She looked up when they entered. For one terrifying second, Marianne's expression filled with hope. Then uncertainty. But Evelyn smiled gently. "There you are," she said. Marianne nearly stopped breathing. "You remember me?" Evelyn frowned playfully. "Of course I do. You're my Marianne." The relief that crossed Marianne's face was almost painful to witness. Elliot quietly stepped back toward the doorway, giving them space. But Evelyn noticed him too. "And who's this polite young man?" Marianne glanced toward Elliot. For some reason, her voice softened. "This is my friend." Friend. Such a simple word. Yet Elliot noticed how carefully she said it, like something precious. Evelyn smiled warmly at him. "Thank you for bringing her here." Elliot shook his head gently. "She brought herself." "No," Evelyn said knowingly. "Some people only arrive because someone else walked beside them." Neither Elliot nor Marianne forgot that sentence afterward. Especially Marianne. Because deep down, she knew it was true. For years she had been surviving instead of living. Performing strength instead of allowing connection. Winning professionally while quietly losing herself personally. And somehow, the person who finally interrupted that loneliness wasn't a therapist, a wealthy colleague, or an old family friend. It was the quiet employee who stayed late finishing presentations and carried her home without making her feel ashamed. Winter arrived slowly across the city. One evening near Christmas, the office hosted a charity dinner for local community shelters. Elliot nearly skipped it. Corporate events exhausted him. But Marianne cornered him outside the lift. "If I have to attend 6 hours of networking conversations," she declared, "you are suffering beside me." That sounds less like an invitation and more like hostage negotiation. Correct. At the event, Elliot noticed something remarkable. People admired Marianne. But now they also seemed comfortable around her. Employees approached her naturally. Junior staff laughed with her. Even interns stopped looking terrified. Compassion, Elliot realized, changes authority more than power ever does. Later that evening, Marianne stepped outside onto the balcony for air. The city below glittered with Christmas lights. Elliot joined her quietly. "You survived," he said. "Barely. You only frightened 2 interns tonight." Personal growth. He smiled. Then Marianne grew thoughtful. "You know," she said softly, "before last year, I genuinely believed respect only came from perfection. And now?" She looked down at the lights below. "Now I think people trust you more when they know you're human." Elliot leaned lightly against the railing. "My dad used to say the strongest people are usually the ones unafraid to be gentle." Marianne looked at him carefully. "And are you gentle, Elliot?" He considered the question honestly. "I try to be." Something emotional flickered in her eyes then. Not romance. Something deeper. Recognition. The recognition of finding safety in another person. A few weeks later, Elliot received unexpected news. A large international firm offered him a senior position overseas. Better salary. Better opportunities. The kind of career move people waited years for. Everyone congratulated him immediately. Everyone except Marianne. She simply nodded once when he informed her. "That's excellent news," she said professionally. Too professionally. For the rest of the week, she became strangely distant. Meetings became shorter. Conversations faded. Smiles disappeared again behind careful walls. Finally, late Friday evening, Elliot knocked lightly on her office door. "You've barely spoken to me all week." Marianne kept looking at paperwork. "You're exaggerating." "No, I'm observing." Silence. Then finally she set down her pen. "I'm happy for you." "I know." "Then what's the issue?" Elliot studied her quietly. "The issue," he said gently, "is that you sound like someone preparing to lose another person." That hit harder than she expected. Her composure cracked almost immediately. Marianne looked away toward the office windows. "I spent years convincing myself I didn't need anyone," she admitted softly. "Then you arrived and ruined the theory." Elliot's chest tightened unexpectedly. "You helped me remember how to exist outside work," she continued quietly. "You reminded me my life was allowed to contain people." Her voice trembled slightly. "And now you're leaving." For a long moment, Elliot said nothing. Because the truth was, he had been unsettled too. The job offer was impressive. But every time he imagined accepting it, something felt strangely hollow. He looked around her office then. The same office that once felt cold and intimidating. Now it held photographs from staff events. A knitted scarf Evelyn had made decades ago draped across a chair. A tiny plant an intern gifted her sat near the window. Signs of life. Signs of change. "You know what scares me most?" Marianne asked quietly. "What?" "That before you, I wouldn't even have noticed something was missing." Elliot stepped closer slowly. "You noticed because you changed." "No," she whispered. "I noticed because someone finally cared enough to see me properly." The room fell silent. And in that silence, Elliot understood something important. Human connection rarely arrives dramatically. Sometimes it grows through ordinary kindness repeated consistently. A ride home. A shared breakfast. A conversation beside office windows. Tiny moments. Until one day you realize someone has become part of your life in a way neither of you planned. Elliot finally smiled softly. "I haven't accepted the offer yet." Marianne looked up sharply. "You haven't?" "No." "Why not?" He hesitated. Then answered honestly. "Because for the first time in years, my life already feels meaningful where I am." Her eyes filled instantly. Not dramatic tears. Quiet ones. The kind people shed when hope returns carefully after a long absence. Marianne laughed weakly while wiping them away. "I promised myself I wouldn't cry at work again." Again? The parking garage counted emotionally. Elliot laughed softly too. Then, after a moment, Marianne asked the question that truly mattered. "What happens now?" Elliot thought about it carefully. Outside the office windows, the city continued glowing beneath the winter evening. Thousands of people rushing home. Thousands carrying private loneliness nobody else could see. Then he looked back at her. "We keep showing up for each other," he said simply. And somehow, that answer felt bigger than any grand declaration. Because real hope rarely arrives all at once. Sometimes it begins the moment someone chooses to stay. The following spring, Holloway and Finch launched a new employee well-being initiative unlike anything the company had ever attempted before. Flexible hours. Mental health support. Community outreach programs. Paid volunteer days. When journalists asked Marianne during an interview what inspired the sudden cultural shift, she smiled thoughtfully before answering. "I learned that people do their best work when they feel valued as human beings first." The article became unexpectedly popular online. Employees from other companies wrote messages saying they wished their workplaces understood the same thing. But Marianne cared less about publicity than the quieter changes happening every day inside the office itself. People laughed more. They went home earlier. They checked on one another. And slowly, the entire company became warmer. Not because policies changed. Because people did. One evening, months later, Elliot stood beside Marianne outside the office building as employees streamed home for the weekend. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "if someone had told me 2 years ago that my terrifying boss would become the emotional heart of this company, I'd have laughed in their face." Marianne narrowed her eyes. "Terrifying? You once made a grown accountant apologize to a printer. He deserved it." Elliot grinned. Then Marianne's expression softened. "I never thanked you properly." "You did." "No," she said quietly. "I thanked you for one night." Her eyes met his steadily. "I never thanked you for changing the direction of my life." Elliot looked away briefly, almost humbled by the weight of that. Finally he shrugged lightly. "You changed mine too." And that was the truth. Because kindness is rarely one-sided. The people we help often end up healing parts of us we didn't realize were lonely too. As the evening sunlight stretched across the city streets, Marianne glanced toward the busy pavement below. "So," she asked carefully, "what should we do now?" Elliot smiled. "Well," he said, "you could start by taking an actual weekend off." She groaned dramatically. "Too ambitious?" "Wildly." He laughed. And together they walked away from the office, not as boss and employee trapped behind titles and expectations, but as two people who had discovered something quietly life-changing. Sometimes the most important thing you can do for another person is simply notice when they are carrying too much alone. Because one moment of compassion can interrupt years of loneliness. One act of kindness can reopen a heart that nearly forgot how. And sometimes, the person who arrives to help someone else home ends up guiding them back to themselves instead.